12 today on Big 12 Radio. Thanks for hanging out with us today and every day here in your home for the Big 12. Another spot that is a home for your Big 12 is Heartland College Sports, and that's where we find our friend Matthew Postins, who does a fantastic job of writing for Heartland College Sports. Has a piece out now and on which Big 12 team should be on upset alert, and we'll get to that coming up. But how are you, Matthew?
I'm good, guys. Nice to hear Willie on the radio this morning. On the bumper there.
Yeah, there you go. He's bumping into Matthew Postins. We were just talking about the drama going on at BYU right now, and to me it seems pretty cut and dried. Kalani Sitake was told that he would get certain things, and it doesn't appear that he's getting those so
Yeah.
far. What's your read on the situation?
Yeah, I mean that's I'm assuming that goes back to his contract negotiations when Penn State was trying to get him to come over there in December. That's probably about the worst thing you can possibly do is to tell your coach he's going to get something and not give it to him, especially when it's the football coach. Sort of feels like the Brad Underwood situation at Oklahoma State several years ago when Underwood moved from Stephen F. to Oklahoma State and signed his contract, and he has always contended that he and the athletic director had an understanding about what his contract would look like moving forward. They had disagreements, and he ended up taking the job at Illinois. Obviously, I don't think Kalani's going to bolt this year. I mean, he's got a great team, and we're so late in the season that he's going to coach it out. But if Brian Santiago, their athletic director, and their administration promised him certain things, especially in the areas of NIL and facilities, they're going to need to make that right pretty quick because that's the kind of thing that can get a coach to start looking around in ways they don't want him to look around.
Yeah, we thought it was interesting. He dropped an agent reference, and not even long term, in the immediate future, in what ways could this be a distraction?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about, I think one of the bones of contention has been funneling of NIL money from his sport to another sport. You know, if you're trying to give that money to a particular player on your team, let's just say a player on that team's been promised a certain amount of money, and by funneling that money away, you can't get that money to that particular player. That becomes a bone of contention for that player down the line. Maybe it, causes him to play less hard during the season. Maybe it causes him to put his remove himself from the team and say, I'm going to go in the portal when the portal opens in January. Those are the kinds of things that teams have to grapple with now because, the windows are now very defined and very tight. Players want to protect themselves if they want to go in that direction. And if they're not getting what they're promised, by extension of the coach not getting what he's been promised, then that creates issues not just for the coach, but for the player in question and maybe for the locker room at large.
What's kind of your biggest storyline you're tracking right now as we gear up for the season?
I think there's really kind of three things. One, Joey McGuire seems to be embracing that villain role at Texas Tech. I think I think he enjoys the idea, one, that he's got a great team, and that two, they've got a target on their back. He seems to welcome that, and he was welcoming that at Big 12 Media Days. I'm really interested to see with Arizona State. This is really the first time in Kenny Dillingham's tenure there where they haven't had a lot of continuity, especially on the offensive side, with Sam Levitt going to LSU, so many guys going to the NFL. They've had to really, portal certain guys in to help them in the offensive line and at quarterback. I'm really interested to see if they can continue to maintain being that, really good team they've been the last 2 years. And then I'm trying to figure out which of these three or four teams kind of in the middle of the pack can maybe make a run and maybe contend for the Big 12 championship game with, my focus kind of on Oklahoma State because they've got great tools on the offensive side. I think some of their guys can be really elite by the end of the year. The big question is defense. They don't really have that star on the defensive side of the football, that one guy you really look at and say, boy, he's going to have a really, really great season. But they could be better than the sum of their parts. And if your offense is going to be that good, then all your defense really needs to be is average. And if they can have an average effective defense with that kind of offense, they could give teams a lot of trouble in this conference.
Matt, you wrote a piece about Oklahoma State running back Caleb Hawkins for Sports Illustrated, and you note that he's one of the highest rated running backs in the country. He's got big goals, but then we hear
Mhm.
Eric Morris saying that he won't have as many carries. So how do those two things merge together?
Well, it'll be interesting because I think Caleb had about 270 something touches at North Texas last year between rushing and receiving. And if you look at his numbers, more than 1,400 yards rushing, more than 1,800 all-purpose yards. 29 total touchdowns. I mean, he had, for some players, that's a career. I mean, that's an impressive first season for a true freshman. But Eric Morris referenced what happened in the American Championship game last year when they played Tulane. Hawkins got hurt on the first series of the game, and they kind of had to manage his workload. And if you look at North Texas last year, Hawkins had this huge year. Nobody else really had more than about 80 or 90 carries, and nobody was really that effective or productive. So the way Eric Morris is looking at it now is I've got this freshman in Katie Jones who is highly productive at Jenks. I've got Trey Page from Abilene Christian, who's kind of a scat back. I've got a power back from Central Oklahoma who rushed for 1,500 yards. He's got 4 or 5 backs now that he can use in different situations and in different matchups to take a little bit of the heat off of Caleb Hawkins. Now, I think Caleb Hawkins is going to be the guy, especially in those important moments in the game. But as Eric Morris is trying to balance workload and trying to ensure that Caleb Hawkins is who he can be in November and even December, I think you're going to see him, especially early in the year, distribute the workload a little more based on matchups. And some of these guys like Page and Mason and Jones could have really good seasons even without getting a lot of carries.
Matthew Postins, Heartland College Sports, joining us here on Big 12 Today, Big 12 Radio, presented by Modelo. The most likely upset for every Big 12 football contender, Matt. What stood out to you about that piece when you did the research for it?
Yeah, so I had to sort of set parameters. So I had to figure out who the contenders were first, because this is such a wide open conference. You could have like 10 or 11 teams potentially. So I picked the 6 teams that won at least 6 games in the conference last year. Teams that I felt like could upset them were teams that had an under 500 record in both the Big 12 and overall last year, or if they were out of conference, they had to be under 500 last year. So, for instance, I've got Oklahoma State as a potential upset for Texas Tech. We could have an argument that Oklahoma State might be good enough to beat them straight up by that point in November. But based on record right now and based on the schedule, I think that's the most likely upset on Texas Tech's schedule. For BYU, I chose UCF. That's a game where BYU has to fly across the country to go to UCF. It's not the easiest place to play. It could be a noon game, which for BYU is going to be like 10 a.m. their time because they'll be flying in the day before. I feel like road games, when you've got to change time zones 2 or 3 times either way, I think that becomes a big problem, especially for the team that's kind of favored in that game. For Utah, I picked Arkansas. I didn't really feel like there was like an obvious Big 12 team that could upset them. But Arkansas is really interesting because they went 2-10 last year. Ryan Silverfield is the new head coach. I think he's brought in a lot of talent, and I think they're the type of team that could go into Salt Lake City and give Utah some real problems. So it was really based on a variety of factors. For Arizona State, for instance, I picked the team that I picked their game after they get back from London because they've got this really brutal schedule. They play A&M. Then they go to London to play Kansas. Then they get a week off, and you would think that week off would help them, but they got Baylor coming in to their place the week after that. They got DJ Lagway at quarterback. I think they're going to be much better defensively this year, and I think that's a game that's potentially ripe for an upset because you also have the fact that Dave Aranda, as per usual, is fighting for his job this year. So a lot of factors went into determining which of those teams is most likely to upset these 6 contenders at this point in the season.
Yeah, man, I love it. I love the trap games. I love identifying games that could send the league into total chaos. Speaking of chaos, you noted that this happened in the last 24 hours. Brennan Lorient, who's a really good basketball player, is returning to West Virginia following that Colorado court ruling. He's one of the players that still has eligibility. I would love to know, outside of him, it's tough to track when it comes especially to basketball, all the guys that could potentially be eligible or these late like roster additions right before the school year.
Yeah, it's really tough right now because you look at Texas Tech. They just got Darian Williams back for the same reason. I think it's a different court ruling. But some of these players, they put their names in the transfer portal in April, even though on paper their eligibility was done, because they knew this rule was probably coming, this 5-for-5 rule. And I'm sure their agents were telling them, hey, if you put your name in the portal, you at least have some protection for yourself, or you have a place to go. Some of these other players, like Lorient, I don't think he put his name in the portal. I think he went through the NBA draft process. Nobody drafted him. He didn't sign a contract. So his recourse is going back to the school he was at the previous year. So the way that this this ruling has been kind of refined is you now have two avenues if you're out there. If you were in the portal before April, then you can go anywhere you want as long as they have a scholarship. If you were not in the portal before April, but you still have eligibility based on the ruling, then you can at least go back to the school you're at. And that's why Laureate's going back to West Virginia. And that makes the Mountaineers a really interesting team now in the Big 12 because they were already pretty talented to begin with. Bringing Lorient back in gives them another scorer, gives them another solid defender, and just makes them that much harder to deal with. But I know Texas Tech, I think, has two scholarships left. I think Arizona has a couple scholarships left. Oklahoma State has two scholarships waiting for Cashy Nat and Parsifala because they're part of this as well. Nat believes he has another year of eligibility. Fala is trying to get another year of eligibility for a different reason than everything else here. It's just a mess, and it's a mess because the NCAA just didn't decide before they implemented this rule. Hey, if you played 4 years in 4 years, we're going to give you one more year as a waiver. We'll figure out the scholarship. We'll figure out the NIL. We just don't want any lawsuits or fuss this time. We'll just give you the extra year. We would not be in this position had the NCAA just not learned anything from the Raekwon battle debacle a few years ago and just given those guys the extra year.
Matthew Postins, Heartland College Sports. You're the best, Matthew. Thanks for your time, buddy.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.
Matthew Postins, Big 12 senior columnist and writer for Heartland College Sports. They do a fantastic job of covering the Big 12. So for all things Big 12, it's Big 12 Today on Big 12 Radio and Big 12 Studios, and, of course, Heartland College Sports. All right, the final whistle is next. Cannot wait for story time because apparently your dad called you last night, and that's worthy of a headline here in the final whistle. It's Big 12 Today on Big 12 Radio.